Oh, hi there. Ollie Anderson here. You're listening to Creative Status. This is a podcast where we talk about growing real and being more creative on the way there. That means that you can go into a deeper relationship with yourself, a deeper relationship with other people, and a deeper relationship with life. Every episode, if you don't know, we explore different ways of kind of doing that, how we can heal our lives at various levels, physically, emotionally, spiritually, if you want to go there. If you're returning to a podcast, welcome back. If you are new, my name is Ollie Anderson. I'm a transformational coach. Welcome and thank you for joining me. Today's episode is an interview with Vera Thomlison, who is a Yin Yoga teacher. We go quite deep into the philosophy behind Yin Yoga, how it's helped me in my life. It's something I discovered about 6 months ago, which has really taken me deeper into an appreciation for my yoga practice, reminding me of why I love yoga in the first place. Vera shares some of her stories. She goes into philosophy, and we look at quite a lot of detail around the whole idea of yin and yang. If you don't know, Yin Yoga is from Yin and Yang. Yang is traditionally the masculine energy where you're just on it. You're always in action mode, do. Yin is about winding down a little bit and really just getting into stillness and the being. We explore that dichotomy. We look at how we can merge the two, reach a kind of 0 point where you can put your being into your doing and take that attitude off of the yoga mat. So this was an awesome one. I love yoga, and Vera is really good at talking about it. So Vera, thank you so much for your energy and your time. Everybody else, hope this helps. Go do some Yin Yoga afterwards, and hope you get some value from this conversation. Let's go. Oh, hi there, Vera. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Creative Status. We're going to be talking about one of my obsessions at the moment, which is Yin Yoga and the sense of stillness that you can tap in when you do a Yin Yoga session. Before we get into it, do you feel like introducing yourself, telling people what you're all about, and also what you want to get out of this conversation that we're about to have?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Ollie. I think my whole thing is I want to help people end anxiety with one breath. So realizing that we have all the tools already just with our body, and we really don't need to look for all of these external sources of comfort and fixes, because I think we're in a society that constantly tells us like, oh, if you're suffering from this, here's a pill for it. Or if you're not feeling great, why don't you just have this drink? And I've myself bought into that lie for most of my life. And I just got sober in January of last year. So it's really been my mission to allow people to find a safe space within their bodies and within their practice. Find that in the stillness that Yin Yoga provides, and start to connect with their breath in such a way where they don't feel so alone, because our breath connects all of us. Like as human beings, that's one thing we all have in common, is we have to constantly breathe to stay alive. And when we tap into that connection, the separation ends, the loneliness ends. And that's what I'm all about.
That was amazing. That might be one of the best intros ever. We've been talking for a minute, and you just cracked open so many different things that we could talk about. Like society, everyone's looking for a magic bullet, trying to fix things, but they're only dealing with the symptoms. This idea that we're all connected through breath. There's loads and loads of things that we're going to be able to talk about in this conversation. So I'm hyped up. Before we get into it, is it worth explaining, if you don't mind, exactly what Yin Yoga is? So I talk a lot about yoga on the podcast, but for me, for most of my life when I've been talking about yoga, I've been talking about power yoga, because that's what I've really been doing, and it's what I predominantly do. Over the last, let's say 6 months or something, I discovered Yin Yoga, and I went quite deep into it. So my routine now is I do power yoga in the week, Yin Yoga on the weekends, and it kind of balances me out. But for people that don't know, can you just give us an overview, if you don't mind, of what Yin Yoga is and some of the benefits, which you've already started to allude to?
Absolutely. I just discovered Yin Yoga 5 years ago myself. Up until then, I also only practiced Yang styles of yoga, and I thought that was what yoga was all about, like getting into these poses, stretching my limit of my flexibility and my balance and my strength. And, still bringing a little bit of that, or a lot of that ego with me onto my mat. Like there's a certain sense of competition, right? As you look around at the other people in the room, like, oh, they're doing this. Can I do that? And then there's just, you're still in your mind rather than in your body, because you're so cognizant of everything that's going on around you and how your body needs to like move quickly into the next pose, right? Whereas Yin Yoga is the opposite of that. It's, you're staying in the pose for 3 to 5 minutes. Sometimes I'll even stay longer, like depending on my practice that day. And it's about just turning inwards, because you're not moving. That's the hard part of the pose, is being still. And when you first start doing, you're just like, oh my God, when is this going to end?
Yeah.
100%.
That's my experience.
Yeah. And then I really like to practice in a dark room, because that's the way that it was taught to me. And when you can't see anybody else, there's the comparison just falls away. You're just like, okay, it's just me and my body, and I got to sit here and I got to contend with everything that's happening, not just in my body, but all the thoughts that are racing. And there's no next thing for me to get out of this discomfort. So you learn to be in the discomfort, and you learn this sense of allowing, this sense of surrendering to it.
Yes.
And that's what Yin is all about. It's finding strength in slowness.
Yeah. Like, that's the way you described it is completely aligned with my experience. So I love power yoga because it gets me in that kind of, the vinyasa flow and all that kind of stuff. And you kind of doing calisthenics to some extent if you're doing a push-up in between the transitions and all that kind of thing. I love that energy that you get from doing that. But that energy, I have kind of an abundance of it in my life anyway, because I think I'm quite a yang person. I'm always doing something, like moving towards my goals and all that kind of thing. I try and do that in a real way. But what I learned from Yin Yoga was that actually if I can balance myself out and slow down sometimes and give myself that totally other different vibe where it's just really about doing nothing but learning from that nothingness in the way you've kind of described, like where you sat there for 3 to 5 minutes doing the pose, and obviously at first you want to run, you think, what am I doing? Why am I putting myself through this? But then, it's kind of like meditation, like a non-moving, moving meditation. Like the thoughts start to disappear, and then you just get this stillness, this buzz of just really being alive because you're connected to your inner self, I guess. And I think that energy has just really helped me to kind of stay grounded in the rest of my life when I'm out there doing all this young stuff that I was alluding to. There's a quote that I found before recording. This is very organized for me because normally I don't do any preparation. But on the Tao Te Ching, and it kind of sums up why I think Yin Yoga is so powerful. It says, things grow and grow, but each goes back to its root. Going back to the root is stillness. This means returning to what is. And for me, like, that was a little epiphany when I read that, because ultimately, even though we're kind of moving and growing through the process of doing yoga of any kind, but with this Yin Yoga, it's a lot easier, even though it's not easy, to get to that root. And I think when we return to that root, we return to wholeness, and that shows us who we really are and what life really is. So like it says in the Tao Te Ching, this means returning to what is. And I think most of the time when we're running around, especially if we're doing that yang energy stuff, danger is we're running away from what is. And so it's just really important, I think, to have something like Yin Yoga that returns you to what is, and it shows you what you're rooted in. And then you can go off the mat and hopefully stay rooted somehow. So I suppose the question is, like, does that quote align with how you see and how you've experienced Yin Yoga as a whole?
I love that quote. That's probably one of my favorite quotes from the Tao. It's like page 14 or something, right?
I think it's number 16. Might be, sorry to be anal, but yeah.
But yeah, that was one of my favorite pages as well. Gosh, I love that you brought that up. Absolutely. It is about returning to the root. It's about returning to oneself. And I think that was the piece that finally helped me with the reckoning, right? Like, there is no way to keep running away, because how is that, like, how can you live like that? Are you just going to spend your entire life running? And the thing that you're running from is really just a thought that's chasing you. And the thought isn't even that scary. If you turn around to face it, it's just trying to get your attention so that you can take care of yourself. But we're so scared of stopping, and we're so scared of not keeping up with what we perceive as the expectation that we have to keep up with, that we turn our own feelings and our own thoughts into the enemy. And it's such a debilitating way to live, and it zaps us with all of our energy. And like you said, I really like you said how it's returning to the root, because it's when we root down, when we find that connection with the earth, we realize that everybody else is in the same boat. If we can visualize everybody growing roots into the earth and our roots being interconnected with everybody else, this is actually the strength of community, right? And if we're continually buying into the fact that we're in a very individualistic society and we have to do everything ourselves, where are we ever going to feel strong? When are we ever going to feel like the support that we so need? Because we're very social creatures and we can't do it alone. And when we try to, we become very depressed and very anxious because there's no sense of security or safety. Yeah, so I think that's what Yin is. It teaches us to stop running. It teaches us to be still, and it teaches us to realize the truth of what is.
Yeah. That's the key thing, that last part of what you just said, I think. The idea that it helps us return to what is. And in a way, that's one of the major themes of this podcast and everything I talk about. So for me, most people are running around like headless chickens, and they're trying to escape from the fear that is driving them, that you alluded to. They turn their own thoughts and feelings into the enemy, and ultimately that just puts them in the state where they're running away from the truth about life. And it's purely because at some stage in life they picked up underlying emotional stuff that's kind of uncomfortable to deal with. So normally it's shame, guilt, and trauma that creates these kind of unreal thoughts and feelings. Unreal meaning that they're just pushing us away from the truth of our life. And then we spend our lives running around on the hamster wheel, trying to, find these magic bullets that you were talking about at the start of the show, where, we're looking for a quick fix because we're just focused on the symptoms, where we might get addicted to shopping or substances or other people or whatever it is that we feel like is going to be a substitute for the thing that we're really looking for, which is that reconnection to ourselves. And it's basically very simple when you understand it like that. We become disconnected from who we are. We run around trying to fill the void, which only exists because of that disconnection. And because we're looking outside ourselves, like you said, we never turn inwards and return to that source, return to that root that's always there, because what's real is always real. And so for me, every time I do a Yin Yoga session, it's just reminding me, okay, this is the real stuff. This is what's real. This feeling that I get, this feeling of stillness, is what's real. And if I can remember that and stay rooted in it when I'm doing all the other things, then I'm way more likely to not be using my actions as a way of escaping from myself, but as a way of flowing with life instead of forcing it. And I think that's that's one of these dichotomies that's really important for people to understand. We're either flowing or we're forcing. But the forcing is always unreal in a way, because it's about running away from the truth in the way that you're kind of talking about. So I suppose maybe it's worth picking apart like how people end up in the kind of situation that I just talked about. So obviously I've just shared like my abridged version, which is if something happens, we become split and then we run around like a headless chicken trying to fill the void. But is it more, I don't know, am I making it too simple, or is there more to it, or is there anything that you've learned on your journey about that process? Like, just, is there anything there that you want to unpack?
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is like everything that we hear inside of our heads, right? There's like a lot of voices. The voices that instill fear are the ones that cause anxiety, that cause us to be like, oh no, I got to do this right now or else, you know?
Yeah.
When we get still, those voices get quieter and quieter. It's almost like the more we do, the more we feed into that anxiety and fear. Like, and then the more still we get, the more we feed into that true voice that we're talking about. And that's the voice that's actually you. Yeah. Because everything that gets taught to us clouds that voice, right?
Yeah.
So then in order to part the clouds and see the light, we have to become still. And then once we hear our own voice, everything is so clear. Yeah. And it's practice. Like the first time that I think I heard that voice, I felt a huge sense of peace wash over me. And it was probably like it got really quiet first. And then the voice just said, you're good. You're good here.
Yeah.
It was simple. And then once you start to trust that voice, you can start asking it questions like, what should I do now? And it always has the most simple answer. It might not be like the easiest choice to make, but it's very simple. And it's something that you've known all along, but you just don't want to like admit it.
Yeah. Like, I think you've hit on something really important, which is that we already know the truth. We already know the answers. We already know, at the very least, the next obvious step for us to take. But a lot of the time, taking those steps and moving with that voice, listening to that real voice, it's going to disrupt the life that we've built for ourselves as a product of listening to all those unreal voices. And unreal voices is just things like our social programming, different ego scripts that we've picked up because like we have to be different people in different situations, or we're just reliving things from the past or whatever it is. Old fears that are coming from the reptilian brain, and we confuse that voice for our real voice. All that stuff, like most people are following that on autopilot as a consequence of running away from themselves and running away from the truth in the way that we're talking about. And so they end up building this whole life on top of all that. But then there's this whisper from the real voice, which is ultimately the shadow self, I think, trying to call for our attention a lot of the time. That's whispering, and it's basically saying, right, this is what you need to do. It feels aligned because it is real, but there's that fear of like taking that leap and like watching the whole house of cards come down. And so I suppose there's two things going on. One is learning to listen to that voice in the stillness, because that's, you know, where it is. But then the other thing as well, I guess, is using that stillness to overcome the fear of kind of acting on it. And also, like, once you are acting on it and you're moving forward and you have to ride through uncertainty and all that kind of stuff and see your life get kind of deconstructed and reconstructed, you can use like the stillness as a kind of, I guess, a reminder of why you're doing it and to keep you kind of calm on the way there, something like that. So really what we're saying is it's super simple, but it's just about making space for stillness as a kind of, I don't want to say like a crutch, but like a support mechanism for going from an unreal or fragmented state to a more real one where we're aligned with wholeness and truth.
Yeah, I think stillness gives us that pause so that we can recognize where the resistance is.
Yeah.
Because resistance is that force that we're talking about, right? resistance requires force. But stillness just requires you to be open, and we have to be open if we want flow. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I really like what you said about this fear of disrupting the life that we've built. Because, yeah, like so many voices tell us to just stay comfortable. And staying comfortable keeps us really small. So then it's this choice of, okay, do I want to stay really like in this comfortable cage? Or do I want to step out of the cage into the unknown? It's going to be uncomfortable. Do I trust myself enough to know that I can handle whatever comes next? And this is just practice again, right? The more that we do overcome something uncomfortable, and it could be small at first, the more we trust ourselves to overcome the next thing.
Yeah. Yeah. You kind of just read my...
Yeah. Sorry, Scott.
Sorry. I was just going to say, you kind of read my mind saying that. So the more time we spend in that place of stillness, the more we learn to trust ourselves, because obviously we get a deeper connection to who we are, and we can see, okay, like, I'm not just this small thing that these voices are telling me. But then as well, yeah, when we start moving forward and taking actions, we get more evidence that what we learned in that place of stillness is actually the truth. And so that makes it even easier. But then also, I think there's something about how, and maybe this is me over romanticizing things, which I do sometimes too, but there's something about when you spend time in that place of stillness, you don't just learn to trust yourself, you learn to trust life as well. Like there's something there, and it comes down to what you were saying, I think, about how everything's connected and, you know, it's all part of the whole and everything. But there's something there about, like, it shows us that we can trust life because we can just let go of so many things. I think ultimately that's all trust is, like just letting go of all the bullshit, basically, and living without fear. And that place shows you that that's real. And so have you learned anything about that from like doing Yin Yoga for all these years? Like just trusting life in general? Because I think that's a superpower. Like if you can trust life, then you're very, very much aligned with the way things are, and things are more likely to work out.
Absolutely. Like, I think the best part is you start seeing things transpire and everything fall into place without you having to have done anything.
Yeah.
That's where the trust comes from, because we're taught like, okay, well, if I don't do it myself, it's not going to get done. If I don't do it myself, it's not going to turn out perfect the way that I want it to. And all trust and surrender is, you know what? I think things are going to work out. They're going to work out in their own way. Yeah. They might not work out in exactly the procedure that I imagined in my mind, but somehow we still got there. So that's where the trust comes into play, right? And I quit my job last November to start coaching and teaching full time. And, you know, that was a huge leap of faith. And I'm just like, oh my God, right? But then everything started falling into place. The connections are coming, the clients were coming, the help was coming, the support was coming. Everything fell into place, and it didn't happen the way that I thought it would. But I just had to keep getting still and trusting the next step that my heart was telling me to do. And yeah, like, so trusting life, man, that's huge. So I was really glad that you brought it up. And the other thing too is when you were talking about realizing the truth about life, the word that popped into my head was creation. And ultimately, life is about creation. And if you think about it, like if you want to create something that's really a reflection of the truth of you, that takes time, and that takes a certain amount of like stability. Like you have to kind of stay still in one spot to start creating something worthwhile, right? If you're always like rushing from one thing to the next, it's very hard to be in a place of creation. And so I think it comes back to that, like, how comfortable are we being still? How comfortable are we being patient? And if there is discomfort, how can we learn to be comfortable in that discomfort?
Yeah. Like the story that you just shared about your business is so aligned with what I've seen when I first started my coaching practice, and like with other people I know that have started their own business. Like when you jump into the great unknown and you basically become responsible for everything that's going on in your life in terms of finances and stuff. Obviously, if you've got a job, you're still responsible, but you know there's going to be a more regular paycheck and all that kind of stuff. If you've got your own coaching practice or something like that, you're out there in the world, and you don't always know when things are going to happen and things like that. And so you're forced to trust in a sense. And when you do trust, that is when things work out. And it's the way we're talking about it, we're making it seem really easy and really simple. And it is definitely simple, but I think the hard part of learning to trust is getting to that point where you can stay in the stillness. You take your yoga off the mat, so to speak, and you're taking that stillness that you feel in a Yin Yoga session or wherever, you're taking that off the mat so that you can slow down and relax and be responsive even in the face of complete uncertainty and the unknown. And that's, for me, is part of the path, I guess, is that learning to slow down, learning to relax. Like if people who are listening to this want to take away, like one practical thing, that would be it, I would say, is learning to slow down and learning to relax. Because if you can do that, you basically get to this point where you don't worry anymore. And like, I really don't worry about anything anymore, like at all. Like it sounds crazy to some people because they're so used to worrying, and they think that it's normal to worry, and they think it's irresponsible not to worry. But I've now learned, I guess, that worrying and fear are like the direct opposite of trust. And the only way you're going to get where you want to be is to trust, which means remaining still and calming down. So I guess the question is, like, the next level of what we're talking about is how do we take that stillness off the yoga mat so that we can live in this way we're talking about? And like, obviously I've simplified it again, saying that it's about learning to relax, training ourselves not to worry. Is there anything else? And also, does that make sense to you based on what you've learned?
Absolutely. And I like that you simplified it. Because, there's no need to complicate yoga and meditation. Like, yeah. Let's simplify it. It is just about learning to relax.
Yeah, honestly, it is. Learning to relax so you can stay responsive. Yeah. And then when you're riding through the uncertainty, because you've been responsive, you're going to be open to opportunities and lessons that arise along the way so that you can take the next action. And it goes back to what we were saying about forcing things off flowing. If you're not relaxed, you're going to be forcing everything according to your plan. And if you do that, then you're not going to take the actions that you actually need to take. And so relaxing, slowing down, it puts you in reality. It goes back to that quote from the Tao Te Ching about, going back to the root and how everything just is what it is, basically. So yeah. So how do we do that? Like, or how have you learned to do that? Or have you got any tips for people so that they can, I guess, implement that? And obviously you're doing Yin Yoga as well.
Yeah. The first thing is, because when I teach Yin, you're in it, right? So you're just like, oh my God, how am I going to get through the next 5 minutes? So we focus on the breath. And it sounds cliche, but like, honestly, when you focus on your next breath, that's all you're focused on, then 5 minutes fly by. You're just like, okay, I'll see if I can make my next breath a little bit longer and my next exhale a little bit longer than my next inhale, and so on. And when you're out in the world, like, this is what I always say, we don't practice yoga to get better at yoga. We practice yoga to get better at living. Yeah. We practice yoga so that we feel better in life. When you're used to breathing like that, when you're used to focusing, okay, can I make my next exhale longer than my next inhale? If something is happening and it's causing you stress, or someone is saying something to you that's triggering, like this happened the other day. I was talking to my mom and I just took a deep breath, and rather than responding how I would normally have responded in the last, 30 somewhat years, I just decided to respond differently. Oh, you know what? Let's just see what happens if I choose a different response. And it's just kind of like, huh? Like, the look on her face. And then it just changed the dynamic and it changed the story, and it didn't play on repeat like the same pattern, which is what is exhausting when we live the same pattern over and over, and we get pulled into this vortex of the same story in the relationship, and we don't realize that all it takes is one breath for us to make a different decision that can change both of our lives.
I love how you've simplified the simplification. Like, we're really getting down to the basics. A lot of the time when I'm talking about this and I'm thinking about it and been in the flow and not forcing and yada yada, I always frame it as, right, you take the next step and then you wait for life to reveal what the next step needs to be, and you take that, and then you take the next step, and you take the next step. You have a loose plan in your head, and you've got the vision, which is what you're aiming towards, but it's all about the steps and waiting for the steps and getting comfortable doing nothing when there are no steps to take. But like, the next level of relaxation and simplification is what you said, is just focusing on the breath, the next breath, and then the next breath, and then the next breath, and then the next breath. And if you can do that, well, you're going to be much more responsive, and you can make those choices like you just mentioned about the choice you made with your mum, where you're not reacting to those same old patterns and the same old scripts and all the bullshit that arises because of it. You're actually choosing wholeness instead of the fragmentation. And so you're going to be more likely to find out what those next steps are going to be, because you've actually just been present and you've been responsive to life. So I think basically we've just solved all of humanity's problems right there. So congratulations to us. Focus on the next breath. There is a question about the sweet spot. So even though I'm saying all this stuff about force versus flow and how we want to remain in the flow so we can kind of, go to the great ocean of life, or however you want to say it, like, action is still really important. And we need, obviously, to take action, because otherwise we're just been so open-minded that our brains are going to fall out, and reality is going to slip through our fingers. We're not going to be where we want to be. So we do have to take action. But how do we find that sweet spot between flowing and taking action, but not forcing, if that makes sense? Like, how do we show up in the world? I guess that's what I'm asking now, in this real way, where there's a little bit of resistance, but we're still flowing, if that makes sense. So the resistance is basically the gap between where we are now and where we're trying to be. And if we force things, we're going to be too yang, and so we're going to end up breaking ourselves. If we're too yin, if that's possible, we're just going with the flow, trusting that it's going to take us where we need to be. Okay, but is there a sweet spot where we can, I guess, speed things up? So it's almost like we are in the flow. The flow, let's say, is just, as a metaphor, is the river, but we're kind of swimming with the current to get results quicker or something like that. Like, I don't know if I'm making it too complicated now. After all this simplification, I'm balancing things out. But
the question is, why do you want to get there quicker?
Yeah. Okay, maybe not get there quicker, but just increase the odds of getting there. Is there something there?
I think there's nowhere to get.
Yeah. But what about like goals? Just goals in general, right? So there's that sweet spot where we are where we are. We can't control life, so we have to surrender. The flow is going to take us where it's going to take us, when it's going to take us there. But within the context of that, we can still choose things that we want. So like,
actually, I think I know what you're saying. Like if I apply it to my life, it's like I've always had this dream of traveling the world and like living in different countries. Yeah. And that's my goal for the end of the year, is to move to South America for 5 months and just see where that takes me. I'm learning Spanish right now, and it gets you excited, right? Because you're like, you have a dream. And that's what life is about. It's like, what do I want to create? What do I want my life to look like? So that I feel like I'm making the most out of my time on this earth.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah. So like you said, there is the yang and the yin in all of us. And if we think about kind of like two wolves inside of us, one is the yang wolf, one is the yin wolf. We want to be able to feed both of them equally. Otherwise, one wolf gets way stronger than the other and it can just like kill the other wolf, right? So yeah, then it comes down back to stillness. You got to listen to yourself and just say, okay, in this moment, do I need to rest? Or do I need to go do that next thing, that next, the act of pursuit? Because, like, if we never moved, we wouldn't even be able to feed ourselves, right? Yeah. So, is there an action that I need to take here, or is that action rest? And in order to know that, we have to really know our bodies. We really have to get into that intuitive sense of what our body needs. And without rest, action would not be possible. Without action, rest would not be possible, right? Like if you just slept or like if you just stayed still all day, you probably have a really restless sleep at night because you didn't get enough physical activity. You didn't get light in your eyes. Your circadian rhythm is like all messed up. But if you also didn't rest, then you would have no energy the next day to take those actions that are needed. So, finding that balance, and your body will tell you. Some days you need more of the other. And like as a woman, we're very cyclical, right? So depending on where we are in our cycles, some days we're way more energized. Some days we need way more rest. For guys, I know it's a little bit different. You're pretty much on a 24-hour cycle. So yeah.
Yeah. Like, how do you see your goal to go traveling? So I think what I'm talking about is Wu Wei in a way. So it's the effortless action thing, but also I guess wanting things without wanting them. Like there's a sweet spot there. So it's like where you are right now is, if you're able to tap into stillness, where you are right now is great. Like you don't really need to change anything. You're just in the present. Life is good. Okay. But because human beings keep growing, even though that growth always returns to the source anyway, which is where we already are, according to that quote that I brought up at the start from Tante Ching, like, even though we keep growing and things are already okay, we can still bring things into our lives or aim for things that are going to allow us to express something or to experience something that I guess we need to experience, so we can either integrate things and go to the next level, or we can release things or whatever it is. But at the same time, it doesn't matter if we get there. So it's that sweet. It's the sweet spot of knowing that we can choose things, we can want things, but want them without wanting them, which I know is, yeah. So how do we do that? I think that's what I was trying to dig at earlier on.
I think the mind is capable of infinite possibilities, and it's our choice to choose which possibilities seem most aligned with our lives. And then, sometimes on the way there, you might realize this actually wasn't the thing that I wanted, but I learned about what I actually want. Yeah. So I think that's the Wu way of it, right? Yeah.
And I suppose we're all on the same path, which is just the path back to the source, back to the root. And I suppose as human beings, we can always go deeper and deeper and deeper into it. But if we've got this Wu Wei attitude that you're talking about, then no matter what happens, whether it's good or bad, whether we get the results or we don't get the results, we can kind of let it go anyway and just use it as learning and fuel for returning to that source of, and that place of stillness. And ironically, using stillness on the way there is something that allows you to realize that actually it's all just a big paradox because you've already got what you want, but like you can keep flowing anyway, something like that. So I started this making things very simple, and I've ended it making them very complicated. But I feel like I learned something along the way, and we have relaxed, we've slowed down. So I think we're kind of in the flow. If you were going to sum all this up, if that's possible, how would you do so? Like, what is the main thing we just learned in this conversation? And once you've summed up, if it is possible, again, can you let people know where they can find you and learn about your website and anything else that you may have to offer?
Yeah. I guess to sum it all up, I would say get still.
Yeah.
See what's there. Do what feels right.
Nice. I was just having a moment of stillness after you said that. So. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
My website is stillyoga.ca and my Instagram is stillyogavera. So if you want to find out more, I have a blog on my website where I write about some of the topics that we went over. You can find out more about yoga, coaching, me. Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. So you really do love stillness because it's in all your usernames and everything. So you are the person to go to learn about this. So I'll share all your links and everything in the show notes. But Vera, thank you for this. It's given me a lot to think about. Like I thought I already was a very still, relaxed person. But I think maybe sometimes I am still forcing things and I'm still rushing things. So I'm going to go do even more Yin Yoga. So thank you for that. But yeah, this was awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ollie. This was really, really fun. So thank you.